Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smith. I'm back again with the English section of the ACT. Now the English section of the ACT is the first test you're going to take when you get to the testing center. You open up your book, test 1, the English test. So let's get things started off on the right foot with a solid strategy to get you through this test. Now I will say this, there's a lot of things in this test that should come to you naturally, so we want to play to our strengths. So let's talk about it a little bit. First, the English test has 75 questions. That's a lot of questions. We've got to get through them effectively and quickly. I don't want you to spend a bunch of time worrying about the first 45 or the last 30 or whatever it is. We need to get a way to get through all of these effectively. This test is broken up into 5 passages. Each passage will have 15 questions. Now, this test can seem a little scary when you look at the number of questions compared to the amount of time you have, because you only have 45 minutes. But the good news is 45 minutes divided by 5 passages gives you 9 big minutes per passage. And that's something we can work with. Now, the important thing to remember is that as we get into each one of these passages, you're going to have 9 minutes. And as we get toward the end of those questions, you're going to start looking at your time and making a judgment call to say, do I have enough time to answer these questions, or do I need to make an educated guess? Don't get slipped up on the fact that maybe you're on your first passage and you're close to the end of your 9 minutes and think, well, I still have all this other time for the other passages. Don't take time from your other passages to address questions on your first passage. If you're really concerned about, well, I think I could get these last few right if I had more time, save them till the end. But we'll talk about that in a minute. The important thing you need to know is that for each passage you have 9 minutes. And if you start with that and you practice each passage with a 9-minute timer, you can always look and see how much time you have left on each one. If you get used to this time format, you're going to have plenty of time to get to all 75 of those questions. And this test is a good test to score really high on. And you can do that. You can maximize your score, because I feel like a lot of it is common sense based on your experience with the English language. So the first type of question, and these questions will be 65 to 75% of the questions on each passage will be questions like this. Now, when you get to this test, you'll kind of find it odd, because every other question on every other test that involves reading at all is going to have some kind of question stem at the top. These questions won't. It'll be simply a number 1 or a 2, 3, 4 through 75 really, and that question will just be asking you to look at the underlined portion of the passage that is also labeled with the number of the question and see if it works fine as it is, or if one of the answer choices is a better way to write that sentence. Maybe it's going to be a question of grammar or punctuation or verb tense. It doesn't matter. It's testing on all these different aspects of the English language. So the best way to approach this entire test is to not read the passages. Do not read them. You don't have time to read them. You don't really need to read them, because most of these can be figured out on a sentence level. So here's the strategy for each one of these. And again, this is 65 to 75% of these questions. You're going to see a lot of these. So go to the underlined words, then read a few words before and after the underlined section. Once you read that, what you then want to do is ask yourself, does this look okay grammatically? Does it sound okay? And if it does, then you know that maybe your first choice of no change, which will always be a choice on these questions, is to leave it the way it is. If that sounds okay, then you can leave that choice. And at this point, we're just going to eliminate answers that we know are wrong. So what you want to do is then substitute some of those in for the underlined portion and see if it makes sense. Some of them are easy enough that you just hear that they're wrong and you can cross them out. Some of them have more to do with punctuation. It could be testing comma usage. It could be testing independent and dependent clauses and how you can connect those. Sometimes that's what it's looking for. So you may need to try to identify what exactly are we looking for here. And once you do that, you find the answer choice that's correct. There is a little bit of a rule here that you can apply if you get down to it. But what can often happen is there will be two answer choices that are grammatically correct and sound right, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with them. This happens quite often. But the long and short answer of it is, if you have two answers that look right and are right and can work, you pick the shortest one. Always. I know that sounds simple, and you may think, Mr. Smith, that sounds too simple. But that's how simple it is. If you come down to two answer choices that work grammatically, everything is, punctuated correctly, and it makes sense in the context of the sentence, they want you to choose the one that is shorter. And that's going to be right every time. Now, what I'm not saying is always choose the shortest answer. That's not going to work. You're going to have a really bad time on that test if you do it. But when you get down to that point and you've got two answers that work, go with the shortest one, and it's going to be right every time. Now, the other type of question that you're going to see will be the other, and I would say this is 25 to 35% of the questions look like this. They usually come toward the end of the passage, or the end of the question. So if you have 15 questions per passage, you're looking maybe at the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th question. You'll see these pop in. Will be questions that kind of make it seem like you need to read the whole passage. And they'll say things like, the author would agree, or the writer would. These questions may seem very quickly like, okay, I need to go back and read the whole thing, but that's wrong. And let me explain why. Number one, you don't have unlimited time. You don't have time to read all these English passages. They're not even testing you on your ability to read. They're testing you on your English abilities. It has a lot more to do with writing and writing rules than it does with reading. That's why it's not the reading test. When you get to these questions, the first question you need to ask yourself as you're looking at 25 to 35% of your questions is, do I have time to answer this? If you have time to answer this question, then here's what you need to do. You need to, well, I'll say this, if you have time. If you have time, here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at your answers. I want you to eliminate wrong answers. And then I want you to choose the best answer. And when I say the best answer, what will usually help you determine between the two questions or the two choices that are possible right answers is to go back to the question. Go back to the question and look at the words they use, because the words they use in the question are going to really just be like a big arrow pointing you to one of those two possible correct answers, to which one's actually correct. That's how you need to approach those. Now, that's if you have time. If you don't have time, now you may have 4 questions like this. If you don't have time, or you think it's going to take too long, or it's going to be a harder question to answer, check the others and make sure that you can't answer those really quickly, and then come back. And with the time you have left, if you know you don't have enough time to find it, you're just going to jump down to this step of eliminate the wrong answers. And once you have it down to 2 possible right answers, make an educated guess. Because remember, we've already given ourselves most of our time to take care of most of the questions. And these are the questions that are very easy to find the answers to. When you get to the more difficult questions, you don't want to spend as much time on those, because you want to focus on the ones you know you can get right easily. With the time you have left, it's a judgment call on your end whether or not you have time to do it, or how much time you can dedicate to those questions. And then focusing on which of these remaining questions can I answer quickly and easily, which ones do I have the best chance of getting right. and then moving on and saying, these that I don't think I can get right or I don't have enough time to get right, what can I do to maximize my chance to make an educated guess? And the way to do that is to eliminate wrong answers. With those two steps, that's how you're going to take care of each one of these passages. Now, 5 passages, 9 minutes, that's 45 minutes. I said earlier when we were talking that if you had a couple that you're like, if I just had a little bit more time, I could come back and answer them. Well, hopefully you've already eliminated the wrong answers. And when you go on and you go through the rest of your passages, maybe when you're done, you're noticing a trend that you have a couple of minutes left over on each of these. That would be a good time to come back and wrestle with the more difficult ones, because you want to take it a passage at a time, but you also don't want to get stuck on one that's going to start taking you into your time for another passage. So you really want to be able to cut that off at 9 and move on to your next passage. This is a great strategy for the English test. I hope it will serve you well. And again, the biggest way to get better at this and to really boost that score is to practice this strategy over and over again. So when you go into the test and you tear open that seal and you get to the first test, you know exactly what to do. When you go in with a plan, you have a much better chance of finding success. I'm Mr. Smith, and this is your strategy for the English section of the ACT.